Chapter 3 The Night Bus. Harry was several streets away before he finally collapsed onto the low wall on Magnolia Crescent. Panting from the effort of dragging his trunk, he sat quite still, anger still surging through him, listening to the frantic thumping of his heart. But after 10 minutes alone in the dark street, a new emotion overtook him: panic. Whichever way he looked at it, he had never been a worse fix. He was stranded, quite alone, in a dark muggle world with absolutely nowhere to go. And the worst of it was, he had just done a serious magic, which meant that he was almost certainly expelled from Hogwarts. He had broken the decree for the restriction of underage wizardry so badly that he was surprised Ministry of Magic representatives weren't swooping down on him where he sat. Harry shivered and looked up and down the Magnolia Crescent. What was going to happen to him? Would he be arrested? Or would he simply be outlawed from the wizarding world? He thought to himself, Ron and Hermione, and his heart sank even lower. Harry was sure that, a criminal or not, Ron and Hermione would want to help him now. But they were both abroad, and Hedwig gone. He had no means of contacting them. He didn't even have a muggle money either. There was a little wizard gold in the money bag at the bottom of his trunk, but the rest of the fortune his parents had left him was stored in the vault down at Gringotts Wizarding Bank in London. He'd never been able to drag his trunk all the way to London unless... He looked around at his wand, which was still clutching his hand. If he was already expelled, his heart now thumping painfully fast, a bit more magic couldn't hurt. He had the invisibility cloak that he had inherited from his father. What if he bewitched the trunk and made it feather-like and tied it to his broomstick, covered himself in the cloak, and flew to London? Then he could at least get the rest of his money out of his vault and begin his life as an outcast. Oh, it was a horrible prospect, but he couldn't sit on the wall forever. And he'd find himself trying to explain the Muggle police why he was out in the dead of night with a trunk full of spell books and broomsticks. Harry opened his trunk again and pushed the corners aside, looking for the invisibility cloak. But before he found it, he straightened up suddenly, looking around him once more. A funny prickling on the back of his neck made Harry feel like he was being watched. The street appeared to be deserted. There were no lights shown from any of the large square houses. He bent over his trunk again, almost immediately stood up once more, his hand clenched to his wand. He had sensed, rather than heard it, someone or something was standing in the narrow gap between the garage and the fence between him. Harry squinted at the black alley. If only it would move, then he'd know whether it was just a stray cat or something else. Luminous, Harry muttered. And the light appeared at the end of the wand, almost dazzling him. He held it high over his head, and the pebble dashed wall of the number 2 suddenly sparkled. A garage door gleamed, and between them Harry saw quite distinctly the hulking outline of something very big with wide gleaming eyes. Harry stepped backward. His legs hit his trunk, and he tripped. His wand flew out of his hand and flung out of his arm to break his fall. He landed with his hand in the gutter. There was a deafening bang, and Harry threw up his hands to shield his eyes in the sudden blinding light. With a yell, he roared back onto the pavement, just in time. A second later, a gigantic pair of wheels, headlights, screeched to a halt, right where exactly had been just lying, belonged to Harry. Saw what was raised his head, a triple-decker, violently purple bus, which appeared out of thin air. Gold lettering over the windshield said, "The Night Bus." For a split second, Harry wondered if he had been knocked silly by his fall. The conductor in the purple uniform leapt out of the bus and began to speak loudly into the night. "Welcome to the Night Bus, emergency transport for the stranded, witch or wizard. Just stick out your wand hand. Step aboard. We can take you anywhere you want to go. My name is Stan Shunpike, and I will be your conductor this eve." The conductor stopped abruptly. He just caught sight of Harry, who was still sitting on the ground. Harry snatched up his wand again, scrambling to his feet. Close up, he saw that Stan Stunpike was only a few years older than he was, 18 or 19 at the most, with large protruding ears and quite a few pimples. "What were you doing down there?" said Stan, dropping his professional manner. "I fell over," said Harry. "You fall over for?" sniggered. "What you fall over for?" sniggered Stan. "I didn't do it on purpose," said Harry, annoyed. One of the knees in his jeans was all torn, and the hand he had thrown out to break at the fall was bleeding. He suddenly remembered he had fallen over and turned around quickly to stare at the alleyway between the garage and the fence. The night bus headlamps were flooding it with light, and it was empty. "What you looking at?" asked Stan. "That was a big black thing," said Harry, pointing uncertainly into the gap, "like a dog, but massive." He looked around at Stan, whose mouth was slightly open with a feeling of unease. Harry saw Stan's eyes move to the scar on Harry's forehead. "What's that on your head?" said Stan abruptly. "Nothing," Harry said quickly, flattening his hair over his scar. If the Ministry of Magic was looking for him, he didn't want to make it easy for them. "What's your name?" Stan persisted. "Never Longbottom," said Harry, saying the first name that came into his head. So this bus," he went on quickly, hoping to distract Stan. "Did you say it goes anywhere?" "Yep," said Stan proudly. "Anywhere you like, long as it's on land. Can't do nothing on water here," he said, looking at suspicious again. "Did you flag us down, didn't you? Stuck out your wand, and didn't you?" "Yes," Harry said quickly. "Listen, how much would it be to get to London?" "11 sickles," said Stan. "But for 15 you get a chocolate, and 15 you get a water bottle, and a toothbrush, and a color of your choice." Harry rummaged through the trunk, extracted the money bag, and shoved some silver in Stan's hand, and Stan then lifted the trunk with Hedwig's cage, balanced it on top of the steps of the bus. There were no seats; instead, half a dozen brass bedsteads stood beside the curtained windows. Candles were burning in the brackets beside each bed, illuminating the wood-paneled walls. A tiny wizarding nightcap at the rear end muttered, "Now, not now, thanks. I'm pickling some slugs," and rolled over in his sleep. "You have this one," Stan whispered, shoving Harry's trunk under the bed at the right behind the driver, who was sitting in the armchair in front of the steering wheel. "This is our driver, Ernie Prang. This is Never Longbottom, Ern." Ern Prang, an elderly wizard wearing very thick glasses, nodded to Harry, who nervously flattened his bangs against his again and sat down on the bed. "Take her away, Ern." And Stan was sitting down on the armchair next to Ernie's. There was another tremendous bang, and the next moment Harry found himself flat on the bed, thrown backward by the speed of the night bus. Pulling himself up, Harry stared out the dark window and saw that they were now bowling along a completely different street. Stan was watching Harry with a stunned face. That's where he was before he flagged us down," he said. "Where are we, Aaron? Somewhere in Wales?" "Arr," said Ernie. "How come the muggles don't hear the bus?" said Harry. "Them?" said Stan contemptuously. "Don't listen properly, do they? Don't look properly either. Never noticed nothink. They don't. Best go wake up Madam Marsh, Aaron, said Aaron. "We'll be in Albergavany in a minute." Stan passed Harry's bed, disappeared up a narrow wooden staircase. Harry was still looking at the windows, feeling increasingly nervous. Ernie didn't seem to have mastered the use of a steering wheel. The night bus kept mounting the pavement, but It didn't hit anything. Lines, lampposts, mailboxes, trash cans jumped out of its way as it approached, and then back into position once it had passed. Stan came back downstairs, followed by a faintly green witch wrapped in a traveling cloak. "Here you go, Madam Marsh," said Stan happily, as Aaron stamped on the brake, and the bed slid or foot or so forward in front of the bus. Madam Mush clamped her handkerchief on her mouth and tottered down the steps. Then Stan threw her bag out after her and rammed the door shut. There was an amazing another loud bang, and they were thundering down the narrow country lane, trees leaping out of the way. Harry wouldn't have been able to sleep even if he had traveling on the bus that didn't keep banging loudly and jumping 100 miles at a time. His stomach churned, and as he fell back to wondering what was going to happen to him, and whether the Dursleys had managed to get Aunt Marge off the ceiling yet. Stan was unfurled a copy of the Daily Prophet and was now reading it with his tongue between his teeth. A large photograph of a sunken-faced man with long, matted hair blinked slowly at Harry from the front page. "He looks strangely familiar. That man," Harry said, forgetting his troubles for a moment. He was on the Muggle news." Stan turned to the front page and chuckled. "Ha, Sirius Black," he said, nodding. "Course he was on the Muggle news. Neville, where you been?" He gave a superior snort of chuckle and blank look to Harry's face and removed it from the front page, and he handed it to Harry. "You ought to read the papers more, Neville." Harry held the paper up in the candlelight to read. "Black still at large. Sirius Black, possibly the most infamous prisoner ever beheld at Azkaban fortress, is still eluding his capture, the Ministry of Magic confirmed today. We are doing all that we can to recapture Black," said the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, this morning, "and we beg the magical community to remain calm." Fudge had been criticized by some members for the International Federation of Warlocks for informing the Muggle Prime Minister of the crisis. "Well, really, I had to, don't you know?" said the irritable Fudge. "Black is mad. He's a danger to anyone he comes across, to magic or Muggle. I have the Prime Minister's assurance that he will not breathe a word of Black's true identity to anyone. And let's face it, who'd believe him if he did? While Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a kind of metal wand that Muggles use to kill each other, the magical community lives in fear of a massacre like the one 12 years ago when Black murdered 13 people in a single curse." Harry looked at the shadow eyes of Sirius Black, the only parts of the sunken face that seemed alive. Harry had never met a vampire, but he'd seen pictures of them in Defense of Dark Arts classes, and Black, with his waxy white skin, looked just like one. "Scared-looking thing, isn't he?" said Stan, who had been watching Harry read. "He murdered 13 people?" said Harry, handing the page back to Stan. "With one curse?" "Yep," said Stan. "In front of witnesses all over broad daylight. Big trouble it caused, didn't it, Ern?" "Arr," said Ern darkly. Stan swiveled his armchair, his hands on the back of on the better to look at Harry. Block was a big supporter of you-know-who," he said. "What, Voldemort?" said Harry without thinking. Even Stan's pimples went white. Aaron jerked the steering wheel so hard that the whole farmhouse had to jump to avoid the bus. "You out of your tree?" yelped Stan. "What'd you say name for?" "Sorry," said Harry hastily. "Sorry, I forgot." "Forgot?" said Stan weakly. "Blimey! My ears are going that fast." So Black was a supporter of you-know-who?" Harry prompted apologetically. "Yeah," said Stan, rubbing his chest. "Yeah, that's right. Very close to you-know-who. And they say anyway, when little Harry Potter got the better of you-know-who." Harry nervously flattened his bangs down again. "Oh, you-know-who supporters were tracked down, wasn't they, Aaron? Most of them knew it was all over when you know who was gone, and they came quiet. But not this Sirius Black. Mm-mm. I heard he thought he could be the second in command of you know who, and they'd taken over. Anyway, they cornered Black in the middle of a street full of muggles, and Black took out in a wand, and he blasted Elf Street Court, and a wizard got and did a dozen muggles and got out of the way. Horrible, eh? But you know what Black did then? Stan continued his dramatic whisper. What? He laughed, said Stan. Just stood there and laughed. A reinforcements from the Ministry of Magic got there, and he went with them, and with quiet and anything. He was still laughing his head off. 'Cause he's mad. He's mad, Ernie. Any mad? Ernie, any mad? If it weren't for when he went to Azkaban, he won't be now. Aaron said in a low voice. I'd blow meself up before I set foot in that place. Serves him right, mind you, after what he did. They had a job covering it up, did they, Aaron? Stan said. Old street blowing up, them muggles. Dead, was what they said. It happened, Aaron. A gas explosion? Grunted Ernie. Yeah, he's out, said Stan, examining the newspaper picture of Black's gaunt face. Never been breakout from Azkaban before. And there, has there, Aaron? Beats me how he did it. Frightening, mind. I don't fancy chances against the Azkaban guards. Eh, Aaron? Aaron suddenly shivered. Talk about something else, Stan. There's a good lad, them Azkaban guards. Give me the collywobbers. Stan put the paper reluctantly away, and Harry leaned against the window of the night bus, feeling worse than ever. He couldn't imagine that Stan would be telling his passengers in a few nights' time. Hear about Harry Potter blew up his aunt? And then it was on the night bus, didn't he, Aaron? And he was trying to run for it. Harry had broken wizard law just like Sirius Black. Oh. Was inflating Entomology enough to land him in Azkaban? Harry didn't know anything about the wizard prison, though and everyone had heard speak of it, so in the same fearful tone. Hagrid and Hogwarts gamekeeper had spent 2 months there last year. Harry wouldn't soon forget the look of terror Hagrid's face when they had been told where he was going. And Hagrid was one of the bravest people Harry ever knew.